Hey, and welcome to the Signal Watch. Today we're talking about the movie The Flash. And if you've seen The Flash, which is probably why you're here, you know that the Flash can travel through time to try and solve problems. Well, we had our own problem. I thought my hard drive crashed and I'd lost the first recording of a podcast. So we traveled through time to try and fix that by recording it again. And as I was working on that podcast, I realized I had the files of the original podcast. So we're going to open a multiverse of podcasts so you can see both an Earth1 and an Earth2 version of the same podcast, or I guess listen to it, and you can see that it is pointless to do things over and over again and hope for a different outcome. So anyway, we're just doing this because we have it, and I hope you enjoy these two different takes on the same thing. Thank you to Stuart for sitting through doing both of them, and maybe you can hear how our opinions change over the course of a week. Anyway, thanks so much, and here we go with the podcast. Hi, you've reached the Signal Watch, movies, television, comics, and more. I'm your host, Ryan Steens. Join me and our cadre of co-contributors as we examine cultural artifacts of the 20th century, boldly explore the 21st, and try to put it all in perspective. Stay tuned. We're gonna try to make this work. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Signal Watch. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Steens, and with me today is...
Stuart. Hello.
Hey, Stuart, thank you so much for joining me. I wasn't sure if you were going to decide this was a terrible idea before we did it and tap out, but here you are. You've decided you wanted to join me for this film discussion.
Well, I feel like the film has been a part of our lives for so long.
Oh, my God. You're not wrong. I mean, this film has been in pre-development, I feel like, for about 10 years. We're talking about The Flash from 2023. It was this year, right?
Correct. It feels like longer ago, though.
Yeah,
I was like, it was released this year, finally.
2022, but no. It came out. It did not do boffo box office. It kind of showed up and immediately got some bad reviews, and we'll talk about that. And then it just absolutely tanked, and it was kind of the swan song for what had been kind of the DCEU that had been originally formed under Diane Nelson and company, through the lens of Zack Snyder and whatnot. There's still one Aquaman movie remaining, I believe, in the queue, which this movie alludes to towards the end. But yeah, do you remember what the box office was on this thing?
Oh man, I should have looked that up. No, I remember watching the results come in and thinking, oh, that's bad. What am I seeing? 268 million total?
Which should be, in a sane world, a perfectly cromulent box office. But after you have spent years in pre-production, a year in production, and then you've delayed a movie for a year because of COVID, and legal issues with your star that they were hoping everyone would forget about. they finally put this out to great fanfare, I might add. They really advertised this film in a way that was surprising to me, because people kind of had quit advertising movies, which I did not understand. Um, and then, but everyone I kind of talked to about the movie, especially people who were not into comics particularly, was like, yeah, it was fine. I liked it, sort of thing, which I respect and appreciate. People's opinions, they're allowed to have their own thoughts in their own heads. But it was also a
That's
little,
gracious of you.
well, it was a little contrary to what the reviews had been when the thing came out, which were punishing, which kind of surprised me. But
Well,
go ahead.
I don't know. From my perspective, what I remember is CinemaCon happened, right? Early in the spring. And I know that they showed The Flash in its entirety, except for some of the secret cameos, I guess they left out at the end.
Okay.
They showed The Flash, most of The Flash, to all of the people present for CinemaCon, which is basically like all the representatives from the movie theater companies, some of which I knew. And the response from the people who saw the movie at that time was overwhelmingly positive. And immediately AMC, who I work for, was they revised their projections upward after they saw the movie. Right? They said, "Oh, this is better than we thought it's going to be." And at the same time, they saw, I remember, an extended clip from Indiana Jones, and as a response, they revised their projections downward. um, and shortly after CinemaCon, they started having these fan screenings. They had a lot of free screenings where they would find like mailing lists to fans. I got a bunch of invitations to go to these free fan screenings, and they were trying to build, social media buzz.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept reading on social media everywhere, and especially from celebrities would come out and say, "Hey, I saw The Flash." I remember Stephen King was one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Stephen King is like, "I don't really like superhero movies, but I saw The Flash and it's great." You know, uh, there were a couple of people that I know personally who saw it and they were like, this is one of the best superhero movies I ever saw. And it really kind of upped my expectations for it. So I feel like, unfortunately, my first viewing didn't really match my expectations. And so I was a bit disappointed. We haven't talked about the movie at all since you've seen it, so I don't know if you liked it or not. I've seen the movie now like 6 or 7 times because I have a kid who's a big fan, and he watches it all the time. And so I saw it a couple times in the theater, and I've seen it now at home, like, I don't know, a whole bunch of times. Parts of it, as I'm just, eating breakfast or something. And I'll say it's definitely something that has grown on me with repeat viewings and kind of plays better at home. But it definitely didn't quite meet my high expectations when I first saw it.
So I had no expectations of the film when it was in production. I cannot separate my feelings about the movie from my feelings about the Flash as a comic book character. And
Sure.
I feel that this is a case of that is a guy in a Flash suit, sure is shooting. He is not any Flash I'm aware of that I've ever am familiar with as a character. He's a guy who is borrowing the suit, and he is doing some of the same things the Flash does. But I've also felt that way about some of the stuff in the comics, totally honestly, since like 2011 or so, 2010. There was a series called Flash Rebirth around 2009, 2010 that introduced a lot of the stuff that was in this and ended up getting tied into the Flashpoint comic, which led directly to the New 52, all of which was the nadir of my enjoyment of comics in this linear existence I'm calling a life. Um, so it
So no nostalgia for the New 52 or Flashpoint from you.
I think that they were both horrible. But also I was a little bit like, so a few,
Negative nostalgia.
yeah, I mean, a few years before that, I had read like the first 60 issues or so of the Barry Allen Silver Age Flash comics. And I have very firm ideas of, and then some of the stuff of the trial of the Flash and some other stuff. And I had in middle school, like Wally West had been kind of my guy, and like I'd read Flash comics for a while there. And then again in college and afterward, it was very much like a Wally guy, but was totally fine with the switch back to Barry, yada yada. And then they inserted, trying to give him motivation, gave him this past that he had never previously had in his prior 50 years of existence, of like this tragic thing going on with his parents. And so, why would you ever become a police scientist? Only if your parents were murdered or whatever. And it very much, if you follow Jeff Johns' work, that tracks, right? I mean, that's the kind of thing he's going to write. So, I'm kind of almost okay with it. Like they added it on. It'd be a little bit like finding out Bruce Wayne also had a cousin who was really into bats, like at the last minute. Like it was like this weird add-on to who Barry Allen was. And so watching the film, you can't help but kind of go, huh. Yeah, and this is going back to Justice League when Ezra Miller showed up. Like he's more playing a Wally West type, but he doesn't have any of the, actually, I take this all kind of seriously, stuff that Wally had anyway. It's just his own character is what it is. It's just a different guy wearing it. Versus I thought the guy, at least for the first few seasons of the TV show, Grant Gustin, really felt like Barry Allen to me. And that they worried about making sure you knew who he was, what his deal was on that TV show, even as they worked in all that kind of post rebirth stuff of him having his personal tragedy written into part of the show. At the end of the day, he's a guy who's trying to protect Central City. In this thing, he's portrayed as kind of the cleanup guy for Batman. And that's kind of what he does. I think DC has had a major problem of only showing these characters in certain moments because they want to jump immediately to their Infinity War and Endgame with every single movie. And it's leaving out all the stuff that makes that stuff count when it happens. So
Yeah, I think the only being the cleanup guy for Batman thing would have played fine if we'd just seen more of him, as the Flash first. It would have been, I mean, it's a fine kind of like comedic aside, right? It's the kind of thing that I enjoy actually in comics or in TV shows, like the Buffy the Vampire Slayer episode that focuses on Xander never getting to help and stuff like that is kind of what it felt like in the beginning of the movie. But yeah, this is supposed to be our introduction to the Flash. This is the Flash movie, right? And so it did feel kind of off. I wanted to go back a second though and say I'm definitely a Wally West guy. Like I started reading Flash comics in the early 90s, I guess. So I was reading
good era, yeah.
Yeah. And so I read, Wally in the Flash by Mark Waid. I read Wally in the JLA comics by Grant Morrison, and I read Wally in the Grant Morrison the Flash issues when he had the crippling incident.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty much where, after Morrison left, is pretty much where I also stopped. So I was aware of Flashpoint and I knew what it was doing. And I was aware of the New 52 stuff, but I just wasn't interested. So I didn't even read it.
It's a good call.
But I thought it was worth mentioning, though, that during the long, tangled web of pre-production of this movie, that at some point, and I think it was in 2019, Ezra Miller was unhappy with, all the different attempts at developing a Flash script, which were reportedly focusing more heavily on, the multiverse and getting cameos from other DC characters in there and stuff. that he went to Grant Morrison himself, right? So Ezra Miller, the star of the movie, he's like, I don't like the way this is going. And he goes to Grant Morrison and says, help me write a better Flash movie. And I remember reading that at the time going, that's really cool. Like, I hope that works out. And of course, it didn't work out. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of sad that it took the movie so long in production because, like, so the DCEU started in like 2013, right, with Man of Steel, and they've been making noises about making a Flash movie ever since. You know, I was reading about it in 2016. I remember reading about it in 2019, and you know, one thing after another is causing all these delays. And in the meantime, and add to that, they're always from the get-go talking about bringing in the multiverse, right? And which is cool because the Flash is the character that introduced the multiverse to comics, right? In the 60s. And in the time that it took them to make this movie, we had Into the Spider-Verse come out, right? We had Spider-Man No Way Home come out. We had Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness come out. We had Across the Spider-Verse. We had what's the one that won all the Oscars? Everything Everywhere All at Once, right? So it's like all of a sudden this thing that would have made this movie a novelty is now makes it look like an also ran, like an afterthought. Like they're just jumping on the bandwagon. And that to me was kind of sad and unfortunate because the Flash deserves better than that.
And I don't think they really thought it through all that well, to be honest. Like, what is there? They kind of do a hand wavy thing of going spaghetti. and I was kind of like, well,
yeah,
is it a multiverse or is it a timeline? Because those are not the same thing until they are. And then it is the thing you just said it's not.
Well, and for me, what really kind of hurt it for me was it was just like 2 weeks earlier that Across the Spider-Verse had come out. And Across the Spider-Verse is a phenomenal movie. I mean, it just an absolute masterpiece. I've seen it a couple times now, and it continues to impress me every time I see it. And it deals with many of the same themes as this movie. And it just did it so much better. And it was such an easy comparison because it had just come out, you know, and that really didn't help. Really didn't help.
Like, I can't really stress how much, and this is, I think they could have, had they held off for like the third Flash movie or whatever, which obviously now we know would have never happened. But, and I do want to say, like, the Barry Allen traversing dimensions is like the 5th issue of Barry Allen Flash. It's early. It's super early. It's not like it's like, oh, 5 years into the run of this comic. It's like, nah, we just have to explain where Jay Garrick is because there's literally still people around who remember Jay from 10, 12 years ago. So we need to say what's going on. So like multiverse and every problem DC's had since spirals from that, from that decision.
And every solution.
It's like booze. But yeah, it was very frustrating to watch them do that because what the Flash really in the comics where he really shines is he has, to me, the second best group of villains in comics. Well,
he's got a great rogues gallery for sure.
It's really high up there. I mean, because I'm trying to compare it to Spider-Man's got like everybody, and then Batman, of course, has the most classic ones. But Flash, if you know comics, has what they call the Rogues Gallery, and they're an amazing set of villains that they really made sure they made cool from kind of the late 80s onward.
And none of them appeared in his movie.
And none of them are in his movie. And it was something the TV show did so well of like, here's Captain Cold and here's his deal. Like, you know, all the stuff that you really liked from all that. Here's Mirror Master and here's his deal. And if you think the Flash is a little boring, that's okay because these guys are not. and they all hang out together, and they are a big problem for the Flash. So, had they, and then you could have eventually gotten into all that stuff. But like I said, DC keeps jumping right for like Death of Superman, like immediately. They can't not do it. They just know what the big highlights are. And I'm like, yeah, but all of that stuff happens in context. So this movie struck me as a little strange just in what it was doing to exist. And then what happened within the movie, I think basically works, but it's not a Flash movie. It's a time travel movie.
Yeah, I actually think all the stuff I think Ezra Miller's really good in it, honestly. He's so good as the two different Barrys when he's talking to himself that it's easy to forget that it's him. They're both him as I'm watching a movie. And he's funny and he's engaging and he's likable, and all the stuff that's like Back to the Future-y, right? Where it's like him trying to convince his other self to do stuff is great. I love all that stuff. But I think it's really weird that they made sort of the crux of the climactic action dependent on a movie that's like 10 years old that, not everybody's seen, not everybody cares about it anymore, because the villain of the movie is I'm not sure if the villain of the movie is technically Barry himself, but the visible villain of the movie is General Zod, right? Michael Shannon from Man of Steel, and nobody really, I feel like, cares about him anymore. I had forgotten about who played Feora, and she shows up again. I mean, it's kind of nice to see them, I guess, but I just thought these aren't like fan favorite characters that you're bringing back because of because you demanded it, the fans or whatever. It's like, no, this is as far back as our history goes, and so this is what we have to do, I guess. But it's a strange choice to make the whole movie kind of dependent on your knowledge of another superhero film from 10 years ago that probably you haven't seen, and if you have, you don't really remember it that well.
Or a movie that was 31 years ago with Keaton.
Yeah. Well, I do feel like, so when you were talking about all the people that have come in who like the movie, who are not comic book fans, I kind of feel like it's a little bit like Star Trek 4 in that regard. Like Star Trek, it's very accessible, to people who are not steeped in comic book lore or whatever. They don't care about what's going on with Marvel and DC movies and comics, but they're peripherally aware of what the Justice League is, who the Flash is, and they remember watching Michael Keaton as Batman, and they like that movie. And oh, hey, there's Michael Keaton as Batman again, and he's cool, and this was pretty cool. And so yeah, it's easily likable if you just don't have a lot at stake in it.
Yeah, I think that's fine. That's kind of where I think superhero movies sort of should exist.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. It's just I feel like they could have done it without making some of these strange choices. Supergirl is one of them. I didn't feel Supergirl from this version of Supergirl. I just felt like Supergirl was like, I don't know, an engine of mad, she's just constantly angry, which is
it's also
valid, I guess.
Version of Supergirl that Dan Didio really wanted to exist. Like he when they brought Supergirl back in like 2006, 2005. I don't know if you ever read any of those issues, but I mean the series was it was just tragic reading it. It was like you're like, I know who Kara is, however you want to pronounce it.
Is this the one with the super shield, like, below her belt?
No, this is the like we're gonna put her in an outfit that is very specifically of the year 2005 with low hip riding mini skirt and
that one. Yeah. Okay, yeah. I'm with you. Yeah.
And it's Michael Turner designed her, so she has an extended abdomen and like just a top covering her boobs, and that's it.
but it was a blue skirt,
Blue
right?
skirt, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and then she had a little tiny cape, but she was just like furious all the time, which they did a really good job in about 2008 of kind of retconning by saying, "Oh, she had kryptonite poisoning," and it made her kind of crazy. So now she's herself again. Now she doesn't act like an a-hole all the time.
It
Uh,
just seems, I remember at the time it read like a version of like, we don't really know how to do strong female characters unless they're just like killing people and like constantly raging all the time.
well, I mean, that was kind of where Didio was going with his version, with what he kind of made. He and Eddie Berganza were kind of making happen in the comics, and I definitely feel that's how she was in the New 52 when she showed up. When they basically fixed her for about 3 years, and then they did the New 52, and they're like, "We're back to this bullshit," and
Yeah.
she's just mad, and that's what you need to know. And she's wearing a diaper for some reason.
I was trying not to use the word diaper before.
She
I'm
looks like
sorry.
she's wearing a red diaper. It's the
It
worst
was.
costume
It
design I've
was the
ever seen in
Superman shield
comics.
diaper. Yeah.
Yeah. It was so strange. But yeah, I think the actress was fine. I think she was good. I would have been fine had the, you kind of saw a little bit of hint of like, okay, maybe this could be this character's journey. And then the decision to kill both like, here's a brand new character maybe you like, and here's a character you definitely like in Keaton's Batman, and we're gonna kill them both repeatedly. And there is no
That's
escape from
correct. Yeah.
that is where you are stuck. You are with a hero whose whole thing is he can travel through time. That's all we've told you about him. But you're going to watch him fail now, and that's going to be considered a good. Him accepting the fact that he got these two people murdered.
Yeah, I don't know. That was a hard pill to swallow. That whole like, some problems don't have a solution, and that's the message of the movie, is that you just have to know when to quit. I guess I don't think that that's
Give
necessarily
up early
not.
and often. That is the message of
I I I I can't say that I disagree with, sometimes you just have to know when to quit. I don't I But I don't know if it's appropriate for a superhero story.
You would never see a Superman movie where the thing was you can't win.
You can, yeah, that's correct. You just have to accept that you can't win. I mean, you know, they could have done a better job in framing it. Like, you have to accept that you can't win at this thing you're focused on. Instead, focus on winning this other thing, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of not how they framed it, which is, another interesting choice, I guess. But yeah, I mean, the comedy mostly works, including all the stuff um where younger Barry refuses to quit and just gets like hilariously more and more deformed. I mean, it's tragically comic, but it was comic. um I don't know that the time travel logic works. I watched it now a few times, and every time I'm sitting there I'm like doing the math in my head, trying to figure out, at what point does he shove himself into the time bubble thing, and how does he and but how could he have done that if he hadn't already been created by the and it never really works for me. But on the other hand, there are other movies where the time travel logic doesn't work, and I don't care because I just like the movie. So
Well, yeah,
I
but
have to acknowledge
this
that.
movie just basically says you can't worry about it. But at the same time, it never says Barry should stop the person who we never identify who murdered his mother.
That's correct. Yeah, that was something I noticed, is that through all this, okay, eventually he figures out, I'm not going to be able to stop. I'm not going to be able to fix this by putting the can of tomatoes in the shopping cart. But maybe there's a different way that I could fix it. Like, we didn't even really see him try to catch the person who murdered his mother. That
Well,
never even comes up.
well, and part of that is because they're saving it for the sequel because
That's never going to happen.
Barry's big villain is the Reverse
Yeah.
Flash.
Right.
And
Right. Yeah.
he's who kills Nora. I almost said Nora. I almost said Nora West, Nora Allen. And that seemed like an obvious thing for him to go, and that's kind of how the TV show worked. Was he went and was like, what's all this blurry crap, like, whisking around my mother? That's something that had haunted him his whole life. And of course, like the season finale of season 1 or 2 was like him fighting with the Reverse Flash and realizing he really couldn't stop whatever this was, because the Reverse Flash was just going to keep outrunning him. And they had a whole season where
it's far more cinematic, though, for him to replace the can of tomatoes in the shopping cart than to fight the Reverse Flash. I think you can't argue that point.
It's all about where you put groceries. That's
correct.
Yeah, as you'll remember from Avengers Endgame. The movie, I don't want to say I don't want to just like trash it, but it was definitely a movie that when I was watching it, I was like, this thing has a lot of mechanics. It's both hoping to God we've never read the comics, but also totally leaning on the comics, which is a weird place for these things to live. Marvel's kind of succeeded by going, well, you think you know what's going on. And I would also give Superman and Lois on the CW a lot of credit, because they definitely jack with the audience thinking they know what's going on if they know the comics, and then going, like we did this other thing. And you're like, oh, you got me. There was a whole buildup where we thought we were getting Doomsday for like 5 episodes, and it showed up and it was actually Bizarro, for example. Uh-oh.
You froze.
Yeah.
I got my internet connection is unstable. But you're back.
I'm back. How much did you hear? Where were we at?
Something about Bizarro.
Okay. But so they did this whole thing where you thought it was Doomsday showing up, but actually it was a Bizarro. He just happened to be in the green outfit before he popped out of it. So you were like, oh, anyway. But yeah, I think this has kind of been the DC comic movie problem from the start of, they're just not really willing to sit down and actually think this stuff through super hard. And knowing that they had like 25 drafts of this movie created probably a multiverse of drafts, and no one really remembered what this movie was supposed to be doing or be about. But then you do have moments that do work. Like I thought the whole thing was really sweet with like him hugging his mom in the store. But at the same time, you're like, this is also like not something that would ever happen, is you would hug a strange man who's crying in the middle of a store. Like it's a nice cinematic moment, but it totally feels bonkers. Like, no, you'd be slowly backing away with your cart. And then people in the store would be like, who murdered her? I don't know. There was this guy who was crying.
It was probably the guy in the store.
Yeah, he was stealing hats and shirts off the rack.
So yeah, I did. I agree with all that. In the moment, as I'm watching it, I enjoy the scene, but it's like you have to stop yourself from thinking about it too hard, because it is a good performance, both ways. It's kind of poignant. I feel like the movie is going for, in several different ways, trying to tell people essentially, don't live in the past, right? Don't, obsess over changing stuff that you can't change, move forward, which was a similar theme in the new Indiana Jones movie. But it needed a few rewrites. I did enjoy seeing Michael Keaton again, but again, as I'm watching his character, more questions keep popping up that I keep like pushing back. Why did he quit? Right? Why does his house look so great and Alfred's not there? Right? Like, who is keeping all this stuff in working condition? And I just kind of felt like
superheroes always end up looking like hobos the minute they stop.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's all in service to a couple of nice moments. There are moments here and there that I really like. But yeah, it just, it wasn't what I was hoping it would be, and especially after, just like I said, having seen Across the Spider-Verse, and having handled some of the very similar issues and so well and so gracefully. And unlike this movie, that is a movie where you go back to it and it just reveals more layers each time, that you didn't even think of. And so it's frustrating. I can't really say that I'm a lifelong Flash fan. I'm fine with the Flash. He's always kind of been I'm a Superman guy, and he's always been on the
Yeah.
sidelines, and I enjoy some of his stuff. But I'm not like offended if there's a bad Flash thing. My kid has been watching the Flash TV show for the last few years and is basically obsessed. He loves the Flash. The Flash is probably like his second favorite character to Spider-Man, and he thought this movie was just amazing. I mean, he's 9, but it hits all the beats for him. And this is the first movie that he actually has discovered a disconnect with the critical consensus on, because he saw it show up with a Rotten Tomato score, with the little rotten,
Mhm.
the little green squiggle, and he was like offended. And it's the first time I've ever heard him be offended. He's like, "What is wrong with people?" He's like, "This movie has everything." So, yeah, I mean, I've been there. I sympathize, but at the same people, I do understand what's wrong with people who don't like the movie.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know if I didn't like it when I was watching it. I I just felt like it felt like people who don't know the material very well, which has been the problem with DCEU from 2013, just not really knowing what they're doing with it in a really profound way. There was an interesting article that came out this week on Bleeding Cool that was basically like Diane Nelson is now talking. Like she was the head of DC when all of this stuff launched, right? And basically what she said was like, people blame me because I was in theory at the helm during all of this stuff. She's like, but at the end of the day, I was a person at the table of the movie division. And it didn't really matter what I said. Like the movie division was going to do whatever it wanted to. So it's very different from the way Marvel operates within Disney, which you would think Warner Brothers would try and learn from and appreciate, which is they are their own studio within Disney. They have to deal with Disney stuff and bureaucracy. But at the end of the day, Disney has been smart enough to say, let Feige be Feige. And everything else, they're like, oh, well, our focus groups say X, Y, and Z that we're looking at from, 1999, and that's kind of been how they've just operated this whole time. And I don't know. I don't know how you convince them going forward. We will see what happens under James Gunn because he's the dude who's in charge now. And no Flash is nowhere on their radar, right? They're just not. They're not interested right now. Flash probably will never have a movie again within my lifetime. Is my current belief.
Well, James Gunn was actually one of the people singing the praises of this movie. If you remember, I don't know if you
James Gunn
follow.
was a guy who had a job to do, and that was to
That's
sell it.
true. That's true. But I mean, he was very hyperbolic. He was just like, I can't pull any quotes at this time,
Oh,
but
he was saying this is the best superhero movie he'd ever
yeah,
seen,
he
and
was like,
that's when I was like, I don't believe you. Now I
and
think
I
this
remember
movie is
it
bad.
reminded me a little bit of when Jim Cameron was singing the praises of Terminator Genesis, and I was like, what?
Yeah,
But like, but then okay, so initially I was like, okay, well he just had a job to do or whatever. But then he goes ahead and hires Andy Muschietti to direct Batman Brave and the Bold, right? So
Well, I also think it's entirely possible this movie was the fault of too many cooks in the kitchen over. I mean, if you have 15 people all working on the same souffle and you go like, we're going to take a week to make the souffle, the 15 of us, I'm not expecting a great souffle at the end, right? Uh,
I believe the more appropriate metaphor would be spaghetti. You
yeah.
uncook the spaghetti.
Um, and I think that it's possible he's perfectly fine, and you know, maybe he's friends with Gunn or whatever, and Gunn's trying to protect his career as well, because he knew it was not his fault that this movie ended up being such a mess. Knew the Ezra Miller stuff was definitely out of his hands. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you can Google Ezra Miller legal problems and enjoy. Uh,
Ezra Miller seems absolutely insane in real life, but I can't find a fault with his performance. I mean, he really did a good job, I think.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't think it's Barry Allen, but I like what he did. He's doing the kid on the learning curve. I guess if I was going to try and find a fault with it, let's go ahead and be mean. Um,
Let's be mean.
he he plays in Justice League, and for the first third half of this movie, he is kind of the same goof that he is as 18-year-old Barry. And then
Yeah,
suddenly,
and then
like,
when he's
you're not
around his
taking
younger
this
self, he
serious.
becomes more mature. Yeah.
Yeah, he's suddenly is the mature one in the room, which is supposed to be the dynamic, but it's also like now he's humorless for the rest of the movie because someone else has to take over and be the clown. And I don't mean
Yeah.
in a bad way.
I don't know. I think that's a valid choice though. I think that's something that might actually happen.
Oh, if I met myself, I'd be punching myself in
Yeah.
five. Yes.
I did really like some of his stuff between the two berries. I really liked the bit with the teddy bear where he was mad at his younger
Yeah.
self for disrespecting the teddy bear. Of course, the younger Barry has no idea what the teddy bear means. It's just a teddy bear. But to older Barry, it's like the one thing that his mom gave him. I really thought that was cool. There are a lot of little moments like that I thought were cool. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's true that when it's the two Barrys together, older Barry becomes a straight man.
Yeah.
But I just think that's yeah, I do feel like I would be a bit of a grump if I met my younger self too. So one of the things that people complained about online a lot were the special effects in this movie. And um I can concur um that did take away from my enjoyment of the film myself, especially when I saw it the first time and I was like third row IMAX and everything was like gigantic. Everything, all the CGI just looked so plastic and bad. And Andy Muschietti has said since then that like, oh, this was a creative choice. And I don't think he should have said that, because if that's the case, then it was a very bad choice.
I believe him and I agree. I think it was, to me, there's no way you end up there. And I think he thought he was doing this thing where it looked like statues frozen in time or something.
It looks terrible.
And yeah, it just looks like badly rendered CGI. It looks like video game cutscenes from 2003.
And it made, and it really took away from the impact of the much ballyhooed, cameos that come later in the film that they tried so hard to protect, where they removed the cameos from the prints that they were showing in the advanced screening so that it couldn't get out on social media that, these people were really in the movie. And then when you finally see it and it occurs, it's like, that's not a cameo. That's the Polar Express version of those people. And it's especially strange when I hear that like some of those people actually went into the studio to film their cameo.
Mhm.
Like, And you could have had a photorealistic version of that person, and instead you have a Polar Express version, and it just makes no sense to me. It looks bad.
And the weirdest one to me was the George Reeves one. Looks really bad.
Yeah.
It looked like a cartoon, and
They're moving like Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade balloon characters. Like they move in slow motion, or like the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man or something. Like why are they moving like that? It was quite distractingly bad. And again, right on the heels of Across the Spider-Verse, where just every single frame of that movie could be put in a freaking museum, man. It's not that it looks real, it just looks freaking cool.
Yeah, well, they understand aesthetics in a way this movie absolutely just full stop does not. Like this movie is in a way kind of ugly. It's trying to pull together visual elements of 89 Batman. It's pulling together elements from Man of Steel. It's trying to be Captain America Civil War for a hot minute. It just does a lot of very strange things that I don't really know what they were thinking as far as aesthetics go. The probably the best looking part of it is the opening 5 minutes where they're in Gotham. But it's all the
But then you have the weird babies.
Oh, so
and
I have a phrase I'll use on this podcast from time to time, and I call it joke-shaped objects. And that to me felt like joke-shaped objects. Like I could not, like the movie had not won me over yet. Barry, I was still on the fence about Barry at all because I don't particularly like him in Justice League a whole lot. And then this thing with the babies, and I was just kind of like, this is going on a really long time. This should be a 10-second gag. And I've just realized I can get up and go to the bathroom and come back, and this is still going on.
Did you?
No, I just sat there and kind of sighed it out. But it really set me on my heels for this movie of like, what is the next 2.5 hours of my life going to be like? And I think it was incredibly misguided. It would have been way funnier to have all those babies go out, a flash of light, and then Barry is standing there with that lady screaming and the baby. That's how you cut a joke. That's the timing of the joke. That was, we were seeing basically like, here's how a joke works. Let me break down why it's funny that a chicken has crossed the road to get to the other side. Like,
well, what's tragic too is I remember watching X-Men Days of Future Past and the scene with Quicksilver in the kitchen years ago. I don't know how long that was, more than 10 years ago now.
That had been 20.
And I remember that scene is just chef's kiss, right? For the exact, and they're going for the same thing, where it's like you're seeing him operate in bullet time, and he's like going around and doing all these things, and it's a mix of action and comedy, and it's masterful. And I remember thinking, even back then, I was like, it's too bad this wasn't the Flash, because really this should have been, the Flash should have done this first, the same way the Flash should have done the multiverse first. And yet again, the Flash is just, runner up with his own.
If Marvel had anything that resembled Batman at all, they would have beaten Batman to the punch on everything.
Absolutely.
And that's why, like, I mean, even to this, like, including Captain Marvel has already out Superman, like in 2 movies already. Like,
I remember when every time a Thor movie comes out, the chatter goes up that, Thor is a better Superman movie than Superman,
Well, I think those are perfectly cromulent Thor movies. I'm a Thor fan, and I think that's a poor comparison. I think Captain Marvel's way closer.
Yeah.
But
it's like, but it shows that there's there's an acknowledgement that, you know, there is an archetype, and it's not, and Superman is that, and there's just and there's nothing out there that's really meeting that, you know. And DC has not filled that void for years now.
Yeah.
It's very frustrating as a Superman fan to see all these other really cool superhero movies come out and just knock it out of the park. And Superman, the original, just languishes. And now the Flash, I care less about the Flash, but the same is true of the Flash.
Yeah. Yeah, and the Flash should have been so easy. Flash should have been one of those things that they could have put out in well before the whole DCEU thing. Like he could have been. There could have been 6 Flash movies by now because there's so much content there. You have his overarching stuff with the Reverse Flash. You have crazy stuff like Gorilla City. You have his Rogues Gallery. I mean,
and we do have that with the TV show.
Yeah.
I mean, you can just ignore this movie and accept that the Flash, the CW Flash, is your Flash, you know. And
but I watched that show past the 5th season, and
I stopped after season 3, I think. But yeah,
I think I watched the first 4. Every time I've tried to watch since, I've been like, "Oh, they cut the budget, huh?"
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like Smallville for me, where it's like you have to watch to a certain point, and then you have to have the discipline to stop.
Yeah, it was whole episodes of people standing around whatever the business Star Labs is supposed to be in.
Well, literally everyone is a superhero.
Yeah.
By season 5, literally everyone is a superhero.
Well, I actually want to talk about that a little bit, because that's one of the problems I think with this film is if you don't have an origin story where you're worried about the humans and how this person is different from all of the humans and how they are the only thing that can stop whatever the menace is, you know, of the thing. This was another movie that essentially just pulled together another Justice League. It's just positing like humans are just these things that need to be saved that are out there. Here's the extraordinary people who are going to do it with their bat planes and their, you know, super alien superpowers. And it's the thing that I think people are really glomming onto with My Adventures of the Superman cartoon is Lois and Jimmy are not superheroes. They're the friends of Superman, and he is the unique thing in their world. Now, it's drawing a lot of other stuff down on them, but I don't know why in the past 20 years that's really become a thing in the comics and in the media, in like superhero media, of everyone's a superhero. It's by definition less interesting and less exciting. If you're all a bunch of gods above the concerns of mortal people, then I don't even know what I'm watching at some point. That's why you have the big crossover stuff, like the actual Avengers Endgame movie type stuff. The rest of it, I want to know kind of how are they impacting the world, unless it's a sci-fi spectacular like Black Panther or something like that.
So some of the lack of success of this film has gone down to, you know, superhero fatigue.
Yeah.
Right. Because several superhero films have underperformed lately, including Ant-Man and the Wasp. Do you think that's to blame? Do you think there is superhero fatigue?
Yeah, I do. I think Marvel overshot with all the TV shows. Not all of them were great, but then you also are not being careful about quality control, as in Ant-Man and the Wasp. That movie is just straight garbage. I did a 3-hour podcast on it with Danny Horn. You can go look it up. I was shocked when I watched that movie because I loved the first 2 Ant-Man movies, and I could not believe how. So if you deliver bad product, you're going to diminish people's excitement about going to these things. You know, they're going to be more skeptical of going to the next one. The other thing is, if you all are doing the same thing, you're all doing multiverse stories. That's clearly going to have people doing a compare and contrast where things just aren't going to always compare well. So you got to start thinking about what you're actually doing and why are you actually making this movie? And the only reason this movie got made was because they kept saying they were going to make a Flash movie, and it had been on the schedule forever. And probably they were tied up in some contract thing with Ezra Miller.
Well, and they own, I mean, it's an asset, right? They own a certain number of assets from DC Comics. The Flash is one of them. They had the actors available. So so you make the movie. But
Yeah.
it didn't feel like anybody had like a passion for what this story was about, you know. Do you think that the new DCU will fare any better?
Not really. I mean, I'd like to be surprised. I mean, I don't think James Gunn has really turned in a terrible movie that I've seen.
I
Uh,
really like the Suicide Squad.
yeah, I think Peacemaker was an amazing TV show. But I think that also, you have to also spend all day, if you like Superman, you have to spend all day online with people screaming at each other about how they are the person with the one true vision for Superman on social media.
Well, maybe we're far enough removed from Man of Steel now that that will die
No,
down.
not in the slightest. I mean, people out there yelling about how their one true Superman is
I
Tom.
said maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I
It's
think
been 10 years.
yeah. I mean, if it's markedly better than anything else that's come out, then people may change their tune and say, I accept this guy as well. Um, but I do think, they're dialing back a whole bunch of their releases for Marvel right now and delaying them. They basically have stuff in the can and they're like, we're
Well,
gonna
that's
just
because of the strike, right?
it's because of the strike, but I think they're also like, look, we did too much too fast. Like we overwhelmed people and we stopped doing quality control somewhere along the way. We never stopped to think, do people want to see the Eternals? Um, those are legitimate questions you should be asking, not just, yeah, just grab another property and throw it out the door.
Yeah.
I think the Flash, had they handled it differently and built to the multiverse stuff, would have been fine. But we'll never know now. So I need to
Yeah.
travel back in time and warn Diane Nelson or something. But you can't fix that problem. That's one of those locked in moments in time. There's a cartoon of Diane Nelson frozen in time approving this thing in 2008 or something. So yeah, I guess it would have been 2012, but yeah,
But much like the Flash, she's just one of the members of the Justice League and one of the lower
yeah,
people in the totem pole, apparently. So
yeah.
she's there doing cleanup.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely was that way. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that superhero movies are all like westerns. They're going to have a few decades of a run, and then there'll be a thing that comes out every once in a while, unless Marvel really figures some stuff out over the next 2 years. And I don't know what that would be. DC is not going to be the thing to save it all, and certainly not any of the independents. I don't know what's coming next, but I think it's remarkable. We had all these movies come out this year, and the thing that won was Barbie.
Yeah.
Like
Pretty cool
people,
though,
people were
honestly.
willing to show up for
Yeah.
Barbie, right? I mean,
Well, yeah, because there's not movies like that. That's the thing that gets me is that the studios, they want to follow success with just copying the thing that succeeded and not recognizing that. Then you end up with like a whole marketplace flooded with the same thing. And to me, I mean, aside from being a good movie, Barbie just, there aren't a lot of movies like that. And so people were it was an event, like superheroes used to be an event, and now it's an event that happens every 2 weeks.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you think of how special it was that there actually was an Avengers movie when it happened, and for us, that was a blink of time ago. Like that just happened.
It seems like now, and it's almost safe to call Endgame as the end of the superhero boom.
I think Marvel would have done very well. I didn't think this at the time, but now I think they would have done very well to just do nothing for 2 years.
Yeah, Endgame was the I think the kind of the climax, and then you had No Way Home was a good kind of epilogue, right?
Mhm.
And then everything since then has been kind of like, why should I go?
Yeah. I mean, I don't go to the movies anymore. I mean, I
I do go to the movies, and sometimes it's difficult to
yeah.
to get
The
excited.
thing I'm most excited about that's coming out right now is Poor Things.
Which one?
Poor Things, the Emma Stone movie that
Oh yeah, yeah,
was like, I'm like, yeah, that looks interesting. That's different. I mean, it's it's Bride of Frankenstein again, which is my jam. But yeah, of course, I'd like to see it. Um, but yeah, it's I I would like to think that they're going to be able to pull this out, but this is probably a good indicator to Warner Brothers and DC that they need to figure out what's going to differentiate them. And unfortunately, I think they're going to go back to the board of thinking, because they got very good praise and a lot of money for doing the Joker and Batman. And I don't know what happens when I guess maybe the next Batman movie coming out will tell us what happens. And I think they're working on another Joker. So,
yeah. But I don't think those are. I mean, as far as I've read, those are still going to be self-contained, right? The
yeah,
Batman
yeah.
in the DCU going forward is not going to be the Robert Pattinson Batman.
And I don't know what happens for Gal Gadot. Apparently, Gal Gadot was under the impression they were making another Wonder Woman movie that she said in the
Oh
press, and
yeah, that
everyone was
was
like, no, you're not."
no, yeah, yeah.
So
And honestly, I don't think that her cameo in The Flash really served her very well.
no,
And it made the character that, and I don't know if you've seen Shazam 2.
not no.
She also not to spoil it. Spoiler alert for anybody who hasn't seen Shazam 2. But Gal
You
Gadot.
just addressed everybody on the planet.
Sorry. Well, I also have a 9-year-old who loves Shazam 2. He loves Black Adam and Shazam 2 and The Flash. He is all in for the DCEU of late. So,
Someone needs to be.
yeah, she has a cameo in Shazam 2. And again, it doesn't serve the character well. It makes her just seem like, I don't know, less special. That she just kind of shows up, says, "Hey, it's me, remember me," and then leaves. You know.
Yeah, I didn't even catch what Batman said when he was holding onto the lasso. I was like,
Oh, something about compensating for something. I don't remember. Something about how if he really wanted to fight crime, he would fight unemployment or something like that. Yeah.
yeah, I'm glad to actually to hear that. I assumed it was something horny, and I was like, I don't know, I'm just going to keep going. I'm not going to back
Yeah.
it up. There's too much movie here.
Yeah. I looked it up, and he says, "My ego's far too big to say thank you to someone else." And then he says, "I developed this all-powerful persona to compensate for my childhood trauma." And then I do a lot better just giving my money away, because if I really wanted to end crime, I should end poverty. So there you go.
It's funny, but at the same time, you're right. It's like that's the only use they've really had for the lasso.
Yeah, yeah. It's always like for a joke. And it's always for like a joke that's like, I don't know. I just, not that I don't think those things are true. It's just that I don't want to hear it in a Batman movie.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that's what I read online all freaking day. So
Um, yeah, one of the things we hadn't talked about was the soundtrack to this, which I think is a pretty
oh,
good indicator for
I mean, there's no Queen, which is obviously an oversight.
yes. But yeah, it I found the decision in the final battle to like throw in whatever new grunge whatever in the middle of that like, and then overlaying it with the Elfman Batman theme and then whatever else in there. It was just weird. It was kind of indicative to me of what the movie was having as far as problems went. Kind of the same way you could kind of track the score in Justice League of like, it feels almost like it's calling out.
Was that a White Stripes song?
I don't know.
I did like the "Come on, Barbie, let's go party" thing, and I did like the
that was totally fine. But it just was kind of like, you guys are changing not just the music, but what's happening and what we're supposed to care about in this fight. And you're trying to do the Star Wars cross-cutting, but those movies understand you're supposed to show things in parallel, and then it all leads to a climax. And this was like, Batman's over here getting killed, Supergirl's over here getting killed, and the Flashes are like, pew pew, we're having fun fighting.
we're having fun. Yeah.
Yeah, and
I was a little, oh, that reminds me too, is I thought that the lightning stuff was a little overplayed here. It seemed like the lightning was way more powerful and way more present whenever he was doing his Speed Force stuff than I ever remember seeing. And even to the point where like he's in the grocery store, right? And behind him, as he's moving in like fast motion, and we're seeing him in bullet time or whatever, you're seeing like explosions from the lights from the lightning going off. And I'm like, people are gonna notice that shit. I mean, is he gonna cause a blackout or something just by like moving fast? It seems, is he gonna electrocute someone?
Yeah,
it just seemed like too much. It was like
the TV
you're overdoing
show
it.
really went crazy on the like, he can throw lightning now stuff.
Yeah.
Because they basically figured out they had a problem of, you have a hero who no matter what, at the end of the day, he has to touch somebody with his human hands. And that's something the comics spent a lot of time, especially in the Silver Age, of like, what can he do to thwart the villains, because he can move fast.
Yeah.
And they called it flashbacks, and it was like a whole thing back in the day. And this
whirlwinds and stuff. I love the whirlwinds every time he does that.
Yeah, and in here it was in kind of in the TV show, it was like, well, really what we're worried about is the old, Alan Moore complaint about tactical superiority. And of course it's a movie, so you're going to have cool visual effects, but at the same time, yes, it does draw down the idea of, wait, his powers aren't electrical in nature. So why did he just knock out several city blocks? Like, I didn't. There's just stuff that I was just like, I make it make sense in some way, but no, that's not what we're gonna do. So, the lightning bolt was supposed to indicate that he was quick as lightning, not that he was lightning based. So
yeah. I mean, I get it as like a little flourish, but it was more than a flourish. It was like it was everywhere, and it was like having effects on the environment and stuff.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, did I guess I should say what I liked about the movie. And right now, after talking about it for an hour, I am hard pressed to think of much, but I did think, in general, the performances were good. I enjoyed seeing Keaton back. I thought he felt like he was really all in, which shocked me. I guess he's been through therapy in his personal life. I mean, I have to imagine Birdman was very good for him in some way. Like, Birdman came from a place, right?
It's pretty weird watching. I just watched Birdman again recently, like a couple months ago, and it's pretty weird seeing this close together with Birdman.
Yeah, I mean, he really seemed like he was really distancing himself from the character for decades. And the last few years, he's like, did Birdman, and then he did The Vulture, where he was fantastic and everybody loved him, and his comeback for this and seemed viable at age 70 whatever, as this older Batman. So
and he wore an ascot.
Yes.
And posed like Dr. Frankenstein.
Yes.
In the film, which
that was a little odd. I was like, this is very Frankenstein.
It seemed out of place, but I was like, okay, I'm going with it. That's fine.
But I enjoyed that, and I guess I wish the best for Sasha Callie. Like she had like 5 lines in the movie. She seemed fine, but I don't. I feel bad mostly that
She just screamed and wailed on people.
they tried to give her little moment of like realizing not everyone was bad, and she should probably help instead of throwing in with Zod and the gang. Had she shown up 5 minutes earlier, I do wonder if she wouldn't have been like just hanging out with Zod going, I guess we're taking this planet, which seemed like a definite opportunity for the movie. But yeah, it was, like I said, when I finished it, I was like, it was fine. Like I wasn't angry at it the way I was at Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Like, where I was like, what? I have no idea what anyone involved was thinking when they made this movie. So
Yeah, I guess I've come to settle on that it's not bad. It's just not what I wish it was, is the thing. And it's hard for me to separate it from what I wish it was. You know?
Yeah. No, and I did say to Jamie as we were wrapping it up, I was like, a lot of this stuff I'm gonna have to talk about for the podcast is gonna be, can't separate what I think from the comics. And this is not what I would have done. But I also do think it's got some holes in it that they had way too much time and could have patched, and they seem to have just chosen not to. They decided to do the old classic of, it's comic books, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter.
What is the status quo when the movie's over? It's not really clear, other than it's kind of jokey. Okay, it's jokey in the sense that we know we're not really in the Prime universe anymore, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's very Planet of the Apes.
Yeah. Actually, that's a good comparison. Yeah.
And I would also compare the finale where he sees himself to Of All Movies. I was like, did they steal the end from Lost in Space? Like, did that just happen? Because wasn't he like staying there, but like pushing stuff through time or something from like Will Robinson from his planet? The like 2000 movie, and maybe it was like a 1997 movie of Lost in Space.
I have avoided rewatching that movie, so I didn't.
There was definitely something that was like old Will Robinson was like.
That's right. I do remember that. Now that you mention it, there was a thing with old Will Robinson. Yeah. I mostly just remember them flying through the planet as it was breaking up and being mad that they stole that from Star Trek 3.
There were a lot of things to be mad at in Lost in Space. But yeah, I just wish I felt like someone was trying at the end of the day, and not just like, but at the end of the day, maybe these movies are for 9-year-olds.
I mean, yeah, like I said, it helps to watch someone who seems to be the intended audience, and it just lands perfectly well for them. And so it just kind of makes me go, well, oh, okay, maybe I'm just like too uptight about it. And I should focus on, movies for people my own age anyway.
Yeah. I think that's a perfectly good place to land. But anyway, I think that's about it for the Flash and kind of the state of the DCEU here. Maybe we'll be back to bemoan Aquaman 2. I don't know. But
Bro-sided, right? That was one of the jokes I liked too, was when he called it bro-sided. I was like, that's perfect. I bet it was ad-libbed.
Yes. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. I know that I have friends who were totally fine with this movie. I'm happy for them. I do think sometimes being way too close to this stuff is not helpful. And so I'm willing to accept that as a blind spot for myself. Any final thoughts, Stuart?
I want to echo the Flash and just say that I'm not very good with people, not even myself. Until next time.
Till next time, when we're here with with Stuart from 5 years ago. All right, everybody. Have a good one.
Bye.
that about wraps it up for this edition of The Signal Watch, a production of the League of Melbotus. Thanks for sticking with us. If you enjoyed the podcast, we invite you to drop on by the Signal Watch blog, where you'll find write-ups of a wide variety of movies and more. We'd love to hear from you, so find us online and let us know what you think. Whether you prefer email, blog comments, or social media, we'll be happy to hear from you. We'll be back soon with more exceedingly high-quality content. So, until next time, God damn it, babies, you've got to be kind.